Nick, a man in his 40s, looked like someone disconnected from his own life. He had been married to his beautiful wife, Amy, for 5 years, and today was supposed to be a special moment. It was their 5th wedding anniversary. But Nick didn't seem excited. Instead, he looked cold and indifferent. No gifts, no romantic plans. Rather than celebrating, Nick chose to go to the local bar and down some drinks. At the bar, Nick was greeted by Margot, his twin sister, who ran the place. Margot immediately sensed that something was wrong with him. His face looked tired, and his expression carried a heavy burden. Without needing many words, Margot knew that Nick's mind was fixated on Amy, as if just hearing her name was enough to explain why he looked like that. As he sipped his drink, Nick started to reminisce. His thoughts drifted to the past, to the night he and Amy first met. Back then, they were in New York City, at a book launch event hosted by Amy, a successful children's author. Nick, who was working as a writer for a small magazine at the time, had attended almost by chance. Their first meeting felt ordinary at first, but they quickly connected over their shared love of literature. Even though Nick seemed interested, Amy remained cautious and a bit skeptical. But Nick's wit and confidence made their conversation flow smoothly and effortlessly. That night, they strolled around the city, enjoying each other's company. Not wanting to miss the opportunity, Nick playfully flirted with Amy under the city lights. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and the night ended on a high note. But the flashback faded, and Nick was pulled back to reality. The spark that once ignited his relationship with Amy now felt distant and almost gone. As Nick sat at the bar with Margot, their beautiful memories clashed with the tense and complicated reality of the present. Suddenly, Nick's phone rang. It was his neighbor telling him that their cat was outside. Nick rushed home, but when he arrived, he noticed something strange. The front door was slightly open. He called out for Amy, but there was no answer. A sense of unease crept over him as he stepped inside. The house was eerily silent, until he saw the glass table in the living room, shattered into pieces. Shards were scattered across the floor. Amy was nowhere to be found. Nick panicked and immediately called for help. A few minutes later, Detective Rhonda and her partner, James, arrived at the scene. Rhonda began inspecting the house right away. As she moved from room to room, she spotted small drops of blood in the kitchen. The discovery was suspicious and made her even more alert. As the investigation continued, Rhonda entered Amy's private office. There, she noticed Amy's collection of books. It didn't take long for her to realize that Amy wasn't just an ordinary person. She was a well-known children's author. Understanding the potential media attention this case could attract, Rhonda handled the situation with extreme caution. Amy's disappearance wasn't just a typical missing person case. This was something that could gain public interest. At the police station, Nick sat in the interrogation room, facing Rhonda as she started asking questions. She inquired about Amy's habits, her friends, and the things she liked. Strangely, Nick struggled to answer. He didn't know Amy's blood type, her favorite food, or small details about his wife's daily life. His vague responses only made Rhonda more suspicious. As the tension grew, Nick tried to lighten the mood by joking, comparing the situation to an episode of Law Order, but his attempt fell flat. His humor received no reaction. Rhonda remained focused, carefully observing his every move. In her mind, this was the first red flag. The scene shifted to a flashback, returning to their first wedding anniversary. Back then, Nick and Amy's relationship still seemed perfect. They exchanged expensive gifts, displayed affection in public, and shared passionate moments. However, beneath it all, cracks had slowly begun to form. Back in the present, Rhonda continued her investigation at the couple's home. Suddenly, a pregnant woman named Noelle arrived. Introducing herself as Amy's best friend, she claimed they had been friends for over a year. This immediately caught Rhonda's attention, as Nick had previously stated that Amy didn't have any friends. Before digging deeper into Noelle's claims, Rhonda refocused on the house. The investigation team discovered that the kitchen floor had been recently cleaned, as if someone was trying to hide something, most likely bloodstains. This finding reinforced the suspicion that something terrible had happened there. In addition to this, Rhonda uncovered another intriguing fact. The ownership of both the house and Nick's bar was entirely under Amy's name. As she continued searching the house, she found an envelope labeled Clue 1. The envelope suggested that something much bigger was being hidden. The next day, Nick and his sister Margot went to the police station to meet Amy's parents. Together, they prepared for the scheduled press conference. As a famous writer, Amy's disappearance had become a major news story. Hundreds of reporters gathered, and the conference was broadcast live on television. When it was his turn to speak, Nick seemed hesitant. He only said a few sentences. However, what caught the most attention was his awkward smile when the cameras focused on his face. That moment quickly went viral. After the conference, Amy's parents spoke privately with Detective Rhonda. They revealed that Amy had previously been in a relationship with Desi Collings, a wealthy man who was also her ex-boyfriend. This added another layer of complexity to the case. According to them, Desi had once become so possessive that Amy had filed a restraining order against him. Once Amy's parents left, Rhonda pulled Nick aside and showed him an envelope labeled Clue 1. It turned out to be part of a treasure hunt Amy had created to celebrate their wedding anniversary. Nick read the clue and realized the answer was in his office. There, he found Clue 2. While searching the office, Rhonda discovered a pair of red lingerie hidden in a drawer. She immediately questioned Nick about it, but he lied, pretending he had no idea where it came from or what the clue meant. The next clue led him to his father's vacant house. When Nick tried entering the security code, he got it wrong, triggering the alarm. He attempted to call his father but got no answer. Amid the noise, he found Clue 3 and quickly pocketed it. Shortly after, Detective Rhonda showed up. She had been following Nick. Her presence made him even more uneasy. Rhonda immediately asked why he was there and whether he had come because of Clue 3. Her tone made it clear that her suspicions were growing. Nick dodged the question, claiming he was just looking for some peace and quiet at the house. Without saying much more, he left with a frustrated expression. Once he got home, Nick finally pulled out the clue and read it carefully, trying to understand its meaning. In a flashback, it showed how Nick and Amy's life started to fall apart after they moved to Missouri to take care of Nick's gravely ill mother. Nick lost his job and recklessly spent money on video games, while Amy, growing more frustrated, was forced to borrow money from her parents. Their relationship became increasingly tense, often leading to heated arguments. Amy documented all these events in her diary, whether they were true or not. Back in the present, it had been 2 days since Amy disappeared. Her parents quickly organized a public search event and invited volunteers to help. Nick attended the event, but his seemingly indifferent attitude didn't go unnoticed by those around him. At one point, a woman approached him and asked for a selfie. Without thinking twice, Nick agreed and smiled for the camera. The moment the photo was taken, he immediately regretted it and asked the woman to delete it. Unfortunately, she refused, making him even more frustrated and anxious. That night, Nick sought refuge at his sister Margot's house, hoping to escape the relentless media coverage. The next morning, Margot saw the news featuring Nick's selfie with a big smile. Commentators started questioning why Nick didn't seem sad about his wife's disappearance. Feeling worried, Margot confronted Nick and asked if he was hiding something. Exhausted and frustrated, Nick defended himself, insisting that he was just trying to survive the nightmare he was living through. Margot eventually softened and apologized, and they made up. That night, Andy, a college student who was secretly Nick's mistress, suddenly showed up at Margot's house. She hugged Nick and expressed her frustration over him still being tied to Amy. Andy openly asked Nick to leave Amy and choose her instead. Feeling cornered, Nick didn't reject her. They spent the night together, but the next morning, Margot caught them. Shocked and furious, she demanded an explanation from Nick. With a heavy heart, he admitted that his marriage with Amy had been falling apart for a long time and that he had found comfort in Andy. Margot warned him that if this secret got out, it could destroy him. A flashback from Amy's diary revealed her desire to have a child, hoping it could save their marriage. As a well-known writer, Amy wrote about the pressure she felt in her role as a wife. However, Nick outright rejected the idea of having a child. During a heated argument, Nick pushed Amy, causing her to fall and get hurt. Even though Nick apologized, Amy started feeling afraid of him and considered divorce. At the police station, James, Detective Rhonda's partner, grew increasingly suspicious that Nick was hiding something. His suspicions deepened when Rhonda received a forensic report confirming that the blood found in their home belonged to Amy. This discovery made the case even more serious. That night, Nick prepared to attend another event to seek help in finding Amy. The crowd was large, all hoping for new developments in the case. As Nick began speaking, pleading for help and trying to convince everyone of his innocence, the atmosphere suddenly shifted. A woman named Noelle, who claimed to be Amy's close friend, interrupted his speech. She shouted, accusing Nick of hiding something, and then dropped a bombshell in front of everyone. Amy was 6 weeks pregnant when she disappeared. The crowd fell silent. That silence quickly turned into murmurs of shock. Margot, Andy, and even Amy's parents looked devastated by the news. Meanwhile, Nick, stunned and panicked, tried to speak, but only stammered. The crowd began turning against him, and the situation grew tense. Luckily, the police quickly secured Nick and escorted him away before things got out of control. That night at Nick's house, Detective Rhonda and her partner James returned to confront him. This time, they brought even more disturbing evidence. Rhonda pulled out several photos and placed them in front of Nick. The pictures clearly proved that Amy and Noelle were actually friends, despite Nick previously insisting they weren't close. When Rhonda started questioning him about Amy's pregnancy, Nick immediately lost his temper. He insisted that Noelle was lying. However, tensions escalated when Rhonda revealed that the blood found in the kitchen was confirmed to be Amy's, proving that something terrible had happened there. Not only that, but Rhonda also showed Amy's credit card transactions, which included expensive purchases. Nick immediately denied it, insisting that he never used that card. When asked about the increase in Amy's life insurance policy to $1.2 million, Nick once again lost his temper. He insisted that he only signed the documents because Amy told him to. Rhonda remained unconvinced and calmly stated that all they needed was to find Amy's body to arrest him. After they left, Nick felt even more pressured. He tried to process the reality that Amy was really pregnant. As Nick sat deep in thought, Margot approached him, demanding answers. However, Nick's response shocked her. Amy never wanted to have children. Nick was just as surprised by this claim as everyone else. From the beginning, Amy had always stated that she didn't want a baby. After Margot left, Nick refocused on the clues Amy had left behind. He followed them to Margot's wooden shed. There, he discovered various gifts, all purchased under his name. In the middle of the room, there was a neatly wrapped present, as if it had been deliberately placed there. Seeing all this, Nick started to realize that everything had been carefully set up to frame him. Meanwhile, Rhonda and James went to Nick's father's house to look for more clues. They didn't find a body, but they did uncover something even more shocking, a half-burned diary belonging to Amy inside the furnace. At this point, the story flashes back to the day Amy disappeared. Everything starts to unfold. Amy was the mastermind behind it all. She had meticulously planned everything to frame Nick. In her eyes, Nick had slowly destroyed her. He lied, cheated, and drained her money and dignity. Her plan was incredibly detailed. Amy secretly befriended Noelle, whom she saw as the easiest neighbor to manipulate. She even stole a urine sample from Noelle to fake her own pregnancy. To disappear without a trace, Amy bought a cheap car with cash. She also spread rumors to Noelle that Nick was an abusive and violent man, planting seeds of suspicion in her mind. Amy didn't stop there. She meticulously staged the crime scene. She took her own blood, splattered it in the kitchen, and then left it half cleaned so the police would find it. She wrote a diary full of false stories, portraying herself as the victim of an abusive marriage. Amy left the diary behind for the police to discover, making it seem like she truly feared for her life. Even the clues in the treasure hunt she created were designed to lead the police straight to Nick. As Amy fled, she reminisced about the night she set her sinister plan in motion, the night she discovered Nick's affair with Andy. Meanwhile, Nick read the message Amy had left with the gift he found. The note hinted that she knew about his affair. Realizing just how perfectly the trap had been set, Nick finally understood the extent of Amy's plan to destroy him. But without enough evidence to prove that Amy had framed him, Nick turned to Tanner, one of the best lawyers in the country. Tanner was intrigued by the case and agreed to help him. He told Nick that to win public support, they needed to dismantle Amy's image as America's beloved perfect woman. To do that, they had to find someone from Amy's past who could expose her darker side. Nick knew exactly where to look. Tommy, Amy's ex-boyfriend. Amy had once falsely accused Tommy of abuse, ruining his life. When they met, Tommy revealed that he had always suspected Amy was lying and had manipulated him in a twisted and calculated way. After that, Nick and Tanner shifted their focus to Desi, Amy's wealthy ex-boyfriend who was still obsessed with her. Nick visited Desi, hoping to get information that could help his case. However, Desi refused to speak badly about Amy. He was still deeply in love with her and firmly believed she was the victim in all of this. With more pieces of the puzzle falling into place, Nick now had to figure out how to prove that Amy was still alive and that he had been trapped in a dangerous game designed by his own wife. Meanwhile, Detective Rhonda kept digging for evidence and discovered Amy's half-burned diary in the furnace at Nick's father's house. This discovery further strengthened the suspicion against Nick. The police immediately sealed off the property as a crime scene. On the other hand, Tanner suggested that Nick hold a press conference. He emphasized that the only way to turn things around was to speak openly, regain public sympathy, and shift the narrative in his favor. Meanwhile, Amy had changed her appearance to avoid recognition. She was living in a quiet neighborhood under a new identity. Though she tried to keep a low profile, she remained alert and continued monitoring the news to track the progress of her plan. However, as she watched reports on Nick's investigation, Amy started feeling anxious about all the possible outcomes. In an attempt to speed up Nick's downfall, she made an anonymous call to the police, claiming to have seen suspicious activity near the lumber shed on Margot's property. One day, Amy was playing mini-golf with her neighbors Greta and Jeff. By accident, she dropped a wad of cash, raising their suspicions. The next day, they confronted her, accusing her of running from something. Not only that, but they even robbed her, leaving Amy penniless and desperate. With no other options, Amy decided to contact Desi. They met at a casino where she skillfully manipulated him. She fabricated a story that Nick had tried to kill her and that she had to flee to save her life. Still obsessed with her, Desi believed her story and took her to a secluded lake house equipped with surveillance cameras. However, once there, Amy began to realize that she was now trapped in Desi's obsession. She saw how he wanted her as his wife and felt the situation growing more dangerous. On the other hand, Tanner coached Nick to prepare him for a live interview. Nick finally admitted that he hadn't been the best husband and took responsibility for his mistakes, including his affair. However, he firmly emphasized that despite everything that had happened, he did not kill Amy and believed that she was still alive. As the live broadcast began, Nick delivered a heartfelt statement, showing remorse while maintaining his innocence. His sincere words started to shift public opinion. When Amy watched the broadcast from Desi's villa, she realized that her plan was beginning to fall apart. Nick was regaining public sympathy, which meant she had to adjust her plan before completely losing control. Meanwhile, the police, acting on Amy's anonymous tip, searched Margot's lumber shed. They found items purchased under Nick's name, further reinforcing their suspicion against him. As a result, Nick and Margot were taken in for questioning. However, at the police station, Tanner successfully argued that without Amy's body, there wasn't enough evidence to hold them. Reluctantly, the police had no choice but to let them go. On the other hand, Amy started considering returning to Nick. However, she knew that Desi wouldn't let her go so easily. Feeling increasingly trapped, Amy began devising a plan to escape. As Desi was about to leave, she pretended to seduce him and bit his lip hard enough to make it bleed, creating evidence she could use against him. After Desi left, Amy went into the bathroom and left bindings around her ankles to make it appear as if she had been held captive. When the right moment arrived, she executed her plan without hesitation, brutally ending Desi's life. The next morning, everything changed drastically. Amy suddenly appeared at Nick's house, her body covered in Desi's blood. People were shocked, the media went into a frenzy, and the entire case took a sharp turn. Nick, once considered the most hated man in America, was suddenly seen as a victim. At the hospital, doctors examined Amy and confirmed that she had suffered abuse, aligning with the story she told. Detective Rhonda and FBI agents questioned her. With an innocent expression, Amy dramatically recounted how Desi, her former stalker, had kidnapped and held her hostage. Amy claimed she had been tied up and treated cruelly for a week. To strengthen her story, she even suggested they check the security camera footage. When Rhonda tried to dig deeper by bringing up her diary, Amy cleverly evaded the topic and diverted their attention with a well-planned lie. Rhonda remained suspicious, but without solid evidence, she had no choice but to let Amy go. Amy's plan worked perfectly. The public saw her as a survivor, a strong woman who had overcome injustice. She was once again Nick's beloved. But beneath it all, Nick knew the truth. At home, a desperate Nick confronted Amy, demanding answers. But Amy was always one step ahead. To ensure there were no recordings or evidence against her, she insisted Nick remove his clothes before they talked. In the bathroom, Nick firmly stated that he knew she was a murderer. Amy, completely unfazed, insisted that everything she had done was for love, to be with him again. But when Nick said he wanted to leave, Amy coldly threatened to destroy his life if he dared to try. Nick felt even more trapped. 5 days after Amy's return, Nick, along with Margot, Rhonda, and Tanner, tried to find a way to expose the truth, but their efforts were in vain. The federal authorities had closed the case, tightening the grip of Amy's twisted game around Nick. As Nick tried to find a way out, Amy delivered the final, crushing blow. She announced that she was pregnant. Nick was stunned. Amy had used a sample of his sperm left at the fertility clinic without his knowledge. Filled with rage, Nick insisted that he hadn't touched her since she came back. But Amy remained calm, throwing out one last threat that left him powerless. If he left, she would make sure their child grew up hating him. Nick had no choice. For his reputation, for his child, he had to stay. That night he lay awake. He was now trapped, forever bound to a woman he could never trust again.